They say the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, but is there really such a thing as better devils? I think so. For arcade games. Anyway, let me explain. Hello, and welcome to Dynamic Entry. Today, I'd like to share my thoughts on a topic that nobody asked me about, as usual. And I'd like to explain why I think that the boss fight in the arcade mode of Tekken 2 has the best narrative weight of any arcade boss fight of its kind. And before any Street Fighter 2 fans come in and say, hey, what about Akuma and the Wrath of the Raging Demon against Bison? Very cool. But we're not talking about aura farming, okay? We're talking about story, plot, meat and potatoes. I may not be the greatest fighting player in the world, but I've played a lot of fighting games, from the original Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, all the way to Guilty Gear, Soul Calibur, you name it, I've played it. So I've played quite a few of these, and really, out of all of them, I still think that Tekken 2 presents the best of the best. I'd like to start by saying that the reasons I feel that this boss fight is the most interesting against its contemporaries may actually be because it's nothing like other arcade boss fights. You see, typically in these fights, they tend to be 2 to 3 phase sensory battles where you're fighting against lasers, unblockable attacks, and whatever else the developers can throw at you to get you to lose a life. You see, back then, when we were talking about arcade games, the name of the game was spending quarters. So anything the developer could do this late in the game to get you to fail and start the process all over again was paramount. And that's what made these boss fights so intense. Other than the fact that they did take some skill to actually clear, the other parallel to this would be the fact that you got bragging rights. I mean, it was one thing to have a basic comprehension of the fighting game itself, but it was another thing entirely to either play or to watch someone play from start to finish all the way to the high scoreboard. It's the best. Now, to get into it seriously, I'm going to give you a little bit of a buffer in regards to Tekken lore so that you can have a better understanding of what I'm referring to here. I'm not going to go into details about the entirety of the Tekken franchise, but I'll be covering stuff from enough of it to where I'm just going to say spoilers. If you care about the Tekken story or you want to experience the Tekken story from start to finish for yourself, I highly recommend you do so. This might not be the place for you. However, if you're interested in hearing my thoughts about this, then, by all means, stick around. The original Tekken sees us follow a myriad of fighters, but few fighters are as pivotal to the story as Kazuya Mishima. He's the son of the tournament's organizer and local psychopath, Heihachi, but also he's the main focus when it comes to the actual narrative of the first 2 games. It's sort of a Star Wars-y thing where it's like one family is kind of bending the fate of everything around it. But really, the focus is predominantly on Kazuya and his descent into darkness. When Kazuya was about 5 years old, Heihachi would take a number of steps to solidify his place in the top of his clan, as well as taking over the organization that his father had created. These steps would include imprisoning his father, Jinpachi, murdering his own wife, Kazumi, which, while there were some further information details that came out later about why those things matter, they were just a few of the horrible things that were going on in young Kazuya's life. And out of desperation, he would eventually try to take revenge against his father. To no surprise, Kazuya was swiftly overwhelmed and thrown by his father into the yawning abyss of a chasm below. And it's this action that serves to perpetuate years of bloodshed on a global scale. Heihachi would later explain that this served 2 specific purposes. The first and most important purpose was understanding if Kazuya had access to the Devil Gene. You see, Kazumi's family, the Hachijo clan, has this genetic power within them called the Devil Gene, which allows them to access otherworldly strength at the cost of a few other things like sanity and whatnot. Kazumi had been fighting this for some time and actually fell ill, attempting to resist the urges to take Heihachi's life as part of a secret coup d'etat that her clan had set up. Some real Bene Gesserit shit. It's very cool. They ended up coming to blows, and it's in this confrontation that Heihachi was first truly introduced to the power of the Devil Gene. So, after understanding that this was a real thing he had to worry about it in his son as well. So, that's part 1. Part 2 would end up being the true downfall of Heihachi if you were to ask me. I mean, he's still kind of around in the greater scheme of the story, but if there's anything that was truly his undoing, it's his blusterous decree that a true Mishima would be able to survive the drop into that chasm and climb out. And the unfortunate thing is his son didn't, in some ways. The young Kazuya was fractured at the bottom of the chasm, and what returned was in fact the awakened Kazuya. We know that Kazuya won the first King of the Iron Fist tournament, though the details itself are hazy. We know that after his victory, he repaid his father in kind and threw him off a cliff too to get his just desserts. But after that, instead of attempting to make right of the actions of both his clan as well as his father's corporation, Kazuya doubled down and just decided, screw it. If the old man did it, I could do it. So Tekken 2, we have a similar situation. Kazuya has decided to continue the King of the Iron Fist tournament and is hosting it this time himself. In most arcade fighters, you get about 10 to 12 rounds where the difficulty progressively increases and you get an opportunity to fight a bunch of the different cast members before eventually reaching the semi-boss and final boss of the game. In this case, that takes us to round 9 and 10 of Tekken 2. Okay, for the most part, the Tekken lecture from a history perspective is over, but I want to explain why these details matter before we get into the actual boss fight itself. You see, in most cases, when you get to this point of the story, whether it be you're defeating the amalgam of Darkseid and Shao Kahn, or you're facing off against, like I mentioned, Onslaught or Apocalypse or someone like that, the stages are often just bombastic and otherworldly. You get to see like space or other dimensions, you're in big temples. They're very grandiose. And the majesty and actual weight of the situation in the game oftentimes is put into display here, where you understand that it is an all or nothing struggle. Tekken 2 doesn't do any of that. When you begin round 9, you find yourself in what you can assume to be Kazuya's manor. There are nearly no details as there's almost no light in the room save for the 10 feet between you and Kazuya. Kazuya looks nothing like he used to. He's traded in his jeans and chucks, his traditional fit, in for a like cigar lounge robe and setup. Well, it's more like a suit and loafers. I like the detail of that, as well as the very intricate, though limited design on the tile flooring of the manor. And I feel that that accurately represents his willingness to just like assume his new wealth and everything from his father. But also, conversely, I like that the stage has no further detail outside of that. It really drives the point that Kazuya doesn't see much outside of his own selfish worldview anymore. Really, the only thing that matters is whatever's in front of him, and whatever's in front of him is an obstacle to the plan. Now, for the most part, Kazuya does what Kazuya does. He throws a few wind god fists, he'll do a dragon kick at you and spin around, but he's not really paying attention. He doesn't say anything, he doesn't do anything. And I think that's because he's at the losing end of an internal battle that reaches its conclusion when you finish round 9. Upon defeating Kazuya, you meet the devil himself in round 10. Round 10 is super impactful, in my opinion, the first time you see it, because it is in such stark contrast to any other arcade boss fight. Now, when you begin the round, there is almost nothing but a pitch black void, even darker than the one that you were just previously in the manor. Other than the cold steel floor, the only other two details in the room are a mirror that stretch infinitely into the abyss, and the devil himself, who glows quietly in the room, giving off a violet sort of aura. And there are no words spared. There is no emotion given. The devil sees you, and he comes straight after you with laser fire, perfect shielding with his wings, and a bunch of other bullshit. To be honest, the reality of the story sets in at this moment. And if you're not playing as Kazuya or the devil himself, in which case you fight the angel here instead, it kind of sets in that all of this has nothing to do with you. The reality is that Kazuya is just really kind of moving through the paces as he's falling further and further and further into the depths of this new power he has. And by this point, it's all or nothing. He needs the power in order to attempt to defeat you, and he has no problem succumbing to that darkness. The devil uses whatever methods are available in order to secure victory. He is, however, not invincible, and victory can, and in the story was, achieved. This victory is unceremonious. There's no fanfare, there's no cheering crowd, there's no, hey, you did it, kid. The reality is all you've done is face your own internal struggles as Kazuya, or the projected struggles of somebody who's in pain and someone who's hurt, somebody who's lashing out at the greater world because of wrongs done to them, and in reality is unable to face their own darkness and both accept responsibility for the things they've done as well as make a better change, for that matter. The end of the boss fight is the end of Kazuya's descent, or really its completion. It tells us how pain, abuse, and neglect can turn even a meek and fearful child like Kazuya into a malformed megalomaniac to rival his father both in action and ambition. These days, Kazuya is an irredeemable despot, but I think at one point in time, his character had the opportunity to actually grow from this and change into something better. I think of any arcade boss fight, this is the only one that has any true human connection or emotional depth that you could feel across the cabinet, so to speak. Letting go of the obvious gameplay elements, laser beams, fireballs, spinning cool combos and whatnot. This is a very human story, and one that any one of us at any point in time can find ourselves victim to if we don't take the opportunity to face these problems within ourselves. That's just my opinion though. And really, I could be looking into symbolism and detailing a bit too much, but that's what I get when I look at the story, and I think it's real beautiful and sad for that reason. It adds a lot of personality and depth to Kazuya, who otherwise I think people really only know these days because of his cool like Jordan collection, which is impressive. I won't lie to you, it's pretty cool. But no, I think that there's a real chunk of nuance there that you don't really see a lot, and it's so early in the inception of fighting games and really just games of those style that I love that like it's always been there. Isn't that great? Maybe you don't agree with me, or maybe you feel that I neglected a story from like Soul Calibur, Guilty Gear, Skullgirls, or one of the other cool fighting games of the world, and you're like, hey man, this story's a lot better. Well, you know what? How about you let me know down below and we can talk about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions, or if not, we have a catalog of other videos and a whole bunch of spaces and places that you could watch too. So again, thanks for taking the time as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.